Have you ever wondered how something as complex as a COVID-19 vaccine seemed to appear almost overnight? One day we were watching the world shut down, wiping down groceries and keeping our distance, and then, boom, vaccines were rolling out, seemingly faster than anything before. It felt like a scientific miracle, didn't it? But with that miracle came questions. Real questions. Like, where did these vaccines really come from? Who created them? And how did they get approved so quickly? If you've ever paused and asked yourself, was this too fast, or is this really safe, you're not alone. A lot of people have had those thoughts. It's natural to be curious, even skeptical, especially when something involves your health, your family, and your future. That's why today, we're peeling back the curtain, not to confuse or overwhelm you with science talk, but to walk together through the story behind the COVID-19 vaccines in a way that makes sense, feels real, and helps you better understand the journey from lab bench to injection. So let's start with what many people might not realize. The COVID-19 vaccines didn't appear from thin air in 2020. In fact, their origins go back decades. What looked like a sprint was actually the last lap of a very long marathon. Scientists had already been researching coronaviruses long before COVID-19 even had a name. Remember SARS in 2003? Or MERS in 2012? Those outbreaks sparked a huge wave of interest in the coronavirus family, especially when it came to how to fight them if they ever came back stronger. And, well, they did. This early research laid the groundwork for much of the technology used in the COVID vaccines. Think of it like this. Imagine you were building a house. You'd spend months, maybe even years, laying the foundation, planning the design, choosing materials. Then one day, when everything's ready, the walls go up fast. That's what happened here. When COVID-19 hit, scientists weren't starting from zero. They already had the blueprint. They just had to adjust it. One of the biggest breakthroughs was something called mRNA technology. Sounds fancy, right? But the idea is actually kind of simple. mRNA is like a set of instructions your body can read to make a protein. In the case of the COVID-19 vaccines, it teaches your cells how to recognize the virus's spike protein, which is like the virus's calling card. Your immune system sees that protein, learns to attack it, and boom, you've got protection. But here's the thing, this technology wasn't invented in 2020. It had been in development for years, some say even decades. Researchers had already been exploring mRNA vaccines for things like cancer and other viruses, and they had gone through early safety testing. When COVID hit, they just redirected that work toward this new threat. It's kind of like having a car engine ready and waiting. You just swap in a different chassis depending on where you're going. Now, I get it. Fast doesn't always mean safe. That's something we're taught early on in life. And when it comes to medicine, we want certainty. But the urgency of the pandemic didn't mean cutting corners. What actually happened was an all-hands-on-deck moment in global science. Labs around the world collaborated. Governments poured in resources. Clinical trial phases were run in parallel, not skipped. And for the first time ever, the entire planet was focused on solving one problem, together, all at once. And let's not forget something crucial here. The FDA's role in this wasn't to just rubber stamp approvals. It was to dig into the data deep. These vaccines went through phase 1, 2, and 3 trials like any other vaccine. The difference? Those steps were compressed into months instead of years, not by removing steps, but by overlapping them. It was like turning on every green light at once in a race against time. Still, even with all of that effort and transparency, there were skeptics. And that's okay. Asking questions isn't the problem, it's how we find answers that matters. Maybe you've heard someone say, the vaccine was developed too quickly, so it can't be safe. That kind of thinking comes from fear, not fact. But fear is human. What's important is understanding the full picture and realizing that speed doesn't always mean sacrifice. And this brings us to something that might surprise you. The people behind the vaccines weren't just big pharmaceutical companies. Sure, Pfizer and Moderna became household names, but behind them were thousands of researchers, lab technicians, data analysts, and yes, some incredibly determined public health leaders who had been working in the background for years, some even decades. People who didn't get rich or famous, but whose work saved lives around the globe. It's easy to forget the human side of science, the nights spent in labs, the failed experiments, the moments of doubt followed by breakthroughs. The vaccine story isn't just about technology, it's about determination, cooperation, and a deep belief that we could outsmart this virus together. And speaking of together, this story isn't over. Understanding where the vaccines came from helps us make informed decisions going forward. It helps us separate truth from rumor, science from speculation. Because when we really understand the past, we're better prepared for the future. If we really want to understand where the COVID-19 vaccines came from, we have to go deeper than just the headlines and announcements. The truth is, vaccine development is rarely about one big breakthrough, it's about hundreds of smaller ones stacking up over time. Think of it like building a skyscraper. You see the shiny top floors and giant windows, but what you don't see is the foundation buried deep underground, or the thousands of bolts holding everything in place. That's the hidden work behind the COVID vaccines. Let's talk a little more about mRNA technology, because for many people, this was the first time they had even heard those three letters. One of the most common misconceptions is that this was some brand new, experimental tech whipped up overnight. But scientists had been working on mRNA delivery systems since the 1990s. At first, it was incredibly unstable. Every time they tried to use it in the body, it broke down too quickly. They had to figure out how to protect the mRNA, how to deliver it effectively, and how to get the immune system to respond the right way. It took years of trial and error. Eventually, researchers discovered that packaging the mRNA in tiny fat-like droplets, called lipid nanoparticles, could protect it long enough to reach cells. This was huge. It was the kind of discovery that quietly transformed what was possible. It didn't make headlines at the time, but it laid the groundwork for what would later become the COVID-19 vaccines. And that's not all. There were already animal trials, early-phase human testing, and even pre-pandemic vaccines in the pipeline for other viruses like Zika, rabies, and certain types of cancer, all using mRNA platforms. So when SARS-CoV-2 was identified and its genetic code published in early 2020, scientists didn't have to invent something new from scratch, they just had to swap in the new code. It's kind of like switching out a song on your playlist. The speaker is the same, the technology is the same, you're just playing a different tune. And that tune in this case was a message for your body to recognize a specific part of the coronavirus, the spike protein. Still, even with that background, people wondered, why did the vaccines get approved so fast? Didn't they skip steps? The short answer? No. The longer answer is more interesting. What made the approval process different wasn't that rules were bent, it's that the system adapted. The pandemic brought urgency, but also unprecedented collaboration. Researchers shared data across borders. Bureaucratic delays that would normally take months were fast-tracked, not by removing safety measures, but by prioritizing reviews. The U.S. government even created programs like Operation Warp Speed to fund vaccine development and manufacturing in parallel with trials. That way, if a vaccine proved successful, there'd already be millions of doses ready to go. Of course, that meant taking a financial risk. But it didn't mean taking a safety risk. The same number of trial participants were involved. The same levels of review happened. The only difference was time, and the fact that this time, the world was watching. Let's pause here and think about what that level of pressure feels like. Imagine working in a lab, knowing the entire world is depending on your success. Every data point matters. Every side effect needs to be tracked. Every decision has consequences. It wasn't a race for fame, it was a race for survival. And yet, under that pressure, so many people rose to the occasion. Now, you might be wondering, okay, that's the science side, but what about the origin stories of the vaccines themselves? Who made them? Where did they really come from? Let's take Pfizer-BioNTech, for example. Most people know Pfizer, it's a pharmaceutical giant. But not everyone knows BioNTech, the German biotech company founded by a married couple, Dr. Urs Sahin and Dr. Özlem Teresi. These two weren't just brilliant scientists, they were immigrants, children of Turkish families, and pioneers in cancer research. They had been working on mRNA-based therapies for years. When COVID-19 emerged, they pivoted fast and partnered with Pfizer for global distribution. That partnership combined scientific innovation with manufacturing power, and the result was the first vaccine to receive emergency use authorization in the US. Then there's Moderna. This company had been working on mRNA therapies since 2010. They'd already collaborated with the National Institutes of Health before the pandemic. When SARS-CoV-2 sequence was shared in January 2020, it took them just 2 days to design their vaccine candidate. That's not a typo, 2 days. Because the tools were already there. The hard part wasn't designing it, it was proving it worked. And let's not forget Johnson & Johnson, whose vaccine used a different approach, based on an adenovirus vector. This method, too, wasn't new. It had been used for Ebola and HIV vaccine candidates. Again, not a rush job, but a repurposing of decades of work. What ties all of this together is a single thread: preparation. The COVID-19 vaccines didn't fall from the sky. They came from years of research, trial, funding, and sometimes failure. But in 2020, all that background came together at the perfect time to answer an urgent need. And still, myths and fears persisted. Like the idea that these vaccines alter your DNA, or that they were secretly made by governments to control people. These ideas spread fast, often faster than the facts. And it's understandable, we're wired to be suspicious of what we don't fully understand. But it's also why it's so important to look beyond the memes, beyond the noise, and actually hear the story behind the science. Because behind every shot given was a long chain of real people, scientists, doctors, public health workers, doing their best to keep others safe. By now, we've walked through the science, the people, and the journey that led to the development of the COVID-19 vaccines. But to really wrap our minds around where they came from, we also have to talk about what they represent. These vaccines didn't just come from labs and test tubes. They came from a collective global effort that tested the limits of what humans can do when faced with a common threat. Think about the timeline for a second. In less than a year from the virus being identified, we had multiple vaccine candidates not just developed, but tested, reviewed, and distributed. That's not something to fear, it's something to reflect on. It didn't happen because steps were skipped. It happened because the world worked together, arguably like never before. Resources were pooled. Scientists shared data in real time. Review boards worked around the clock. And the result was something historic. And yet, despite all of this, the myths didn't stop. One that kept popping up was the idea that vaccine makers hid data or that approvals were politically motivated. But here's the reality: every major clinical trial went through strict protocols. The data was made public. Peer-reviewed studies were published. International health bodies, not just US agencies, reviewed the same data. Were there debates? Yes. That's part of science. Were there uncertainties? Absolutely. Science is always evolving. But lack of 100% certainty doesn't mean lack of safety. In fact, the constant monitoring didn't stop after approval. That's what many people don't realize: vaccine surveillance continues long after a product hits the market. It's called pharmacovigilance. Every adverse event is tracked, reviewed, and followed up on. That's how things like rare blood clot risks with certain vaccines were identified quickly and transparently. That system worked as it should. Now, let's zoom out. What the COVID-19 vaccine story really shows us is how science isn't about instant perfection, it's about relentless progress. And sometimes that progress looks like a tiny vial arriving in a rural clinic, or a nurse administering a shot in a crowded stadium, or a truck crossing a frozen highway at 3 a.m. so doses don't go to waste. That's where these vaccines truly came from: effort, sacrifice, and yes, hope. And hope is a powerful thing. For some people, the vaccine meant hugging their grandparents again. For others, it meant going back to work, reopening a business, or just breathing a little easier. It meant less fear, more freedom. It meant moving forward. But maybe you're still on the fence. Maybe someone you love is still hesitant, still unsure. That's okay. These aren't easy decisions, and no one should feel ashamed for asking questions. What matters is that those questions are grounded in facts, not fear. Because when we make choices rooted in truth, we don't just protect ourselves, we protect each other. If you've made it this far in the video, that says something about you. It means you care. You want to understand, not just react. You're willing to dig deeper, think critically, and listen with an open mind. And that's the kind of thinking that can change lives, not just yours, but the lives of people around you. So what's next? Maybe it's having a calm conversation with someone who disagrees. Maybe it's doing a little more reading. Maybe it's simply remembering that science isn't the opposite of faith, it's an expression of faith in human potential, in our ability to grow, to learn, and to solve problems together. Before we end, I just want to leave you with this: the story of the COVID-19 vaccines isn't just about medicine. It's about resilience. It's about innovation. And it's about people who got up every day, worked in labs, drove trucks, filled syringes, and showed up again and again for the good of others. People like you. If this video helped you see things in a new light, I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. Have a question? Drop it below. Want to share your own experience, maybe as someone who got vaccinated or someone still figuring things out? Your story matters. Let's keep the conversation going. And if you found this helpful, please give it a like and subscribe to the channel. We're here to bring clarity, not confusion, to help cut through the noise and offer grounded, honest insight you can use in your everyday life. Thanks for being here. Thanks for being curious. And thanks for choosing understanding over assumptions. Stay safe, stay kind, and stay informed. We'll see you in the next video.